Wrestling with God, episode number 12.
Oh, I turn my headphones up, man. Take out your Bluetooth. We about to take it past the roof. Wrestling with God to find the truth. It's so mind-blowing and the facts are bulletproof. Tune in and connect direct, cause this sets demand respect. We ain't even tripping, the most intriguing podcast on iTunes. Flow with the word like a balloon. Oh, yeah.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Wrestling with God podcast. I am your host, Scott Blair, smiling ear to ear today. I love doing this podcast. I love the guest. I love you guys, the audience. I hope that's evident in my voice. I'm just so happy to be back today. And before I get too mushy, let's move on. We've got lots of exciting things going on around here this week. Very exciting interview lined up for you today. But before we get started, I'm super excited to tell you, Grapplers Church fam, that the Wrestling with God podcast has two incredible sponsors for this week's episode. Now, I know a lot of you are business owners. There's entrepreneurs that listen, people that would like help getting your business going so that you could support yourself in ministry. What if I told you about a breathtaking new environment that you could visit each month where you're going to meet thousands of Christian business leaders and mentors? Now imagine learning how to take any idea that you have and turn it into a well-planned business with a team and a finance dream, and you equipped with all the skills you need to run it. So take your God-given talents to a new level. You'd have access to an endless surplus of like-minded, like-faith affiliates, customers, prospects, experts, those that help you rather than take from you. It's all coming and so much more, and this is going to be from the Safari Christian Business Alliance, one of our sponsors this week. I want you to go to their Facebook page, facebook.com/Safari Business. That's one word. Facebook.com/Safari, SAFARI, Business, BUSINESS, one word. Click on the like button there. Stay informed. Follow them. Let them know that the Wrestling with God podcast sent you over. A lot of great information there. A lot of great connections. Don't miss out on it. Go like that Facebook page and help us both out. For you, the listeners of the Wrestling with God podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. So if you don't know where to start, I recommend Neighbors and Wise Men, Sacred Encounters in a Portland Pub and Other Unexpected Places by Tony Kriz. He is actually our guest today as well. It is one of my favorite books that I've read in the last few years, and I'm sure that's going to be evident to you after listening to this interview. And I really encourage you to get this book. If you don't want that book, there are over 100,000 titles at Audible to choose from. For your iPhone, your Android, your Kindle, your iPad, your laptop, any MP3 player. I devour audiobooks myself every day now while commuting, mowing the lawn, walking the dog, you name it. I'm probably listening to a podcast like this or an audiobook. It's about all I do nowadays. And I tell you, it's been transforming for me. It's really helped me grow in a lot of areas. So to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com, Grapplers Church. Again, that's audibletrial, one word, .com /Grapplers, GRAPPLERS, Church. That's one word, Grapplers Church, for your free audiobook. We've got one of the most insightful interviews yet today. This is probably just part one of what's going to be a 2 or maybe even 3-part interview with Tony Kriz. And even last night while editing this podcast, I was just pulling so much wisdom again from this guy's words. I was just blown away. I'm not going to keep you any longer from it, Grapplers Church fam. Let's grab a hold of God and not let go. Today's guest is Tony Kriz, known by many as Tony the Beat Poet from Donald Miller's bestseller Blue Like Jazz. Tony has earned a doctorate in spiritual formation He currently pastors an embedded community in one of Portland's most culturally diverse neighborhoods. And today we are going to be discussing his book, published by Thomas Nelson, and it is titled Neighbors and Wise Men, Sacred Encounters in a Portland Pub and Other Unexpected Places. Tony, are you ready to wrestle with God?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do it then. For our listeners who may not know you, have not read the book, or possibly maybe they only know you as Tony the Beat Poet, why don't you give us a little backstory to who you are, what you're doing now, so that we don't confuse people. I'm sure many by that title may expect that you're out touring coffee houses on a book tour and reciting poetry, but you're not actually a poet, though, are you?
I am not, yeah. Donald Miller is an old friend of mine. He felt like I sort of had the personality and the presence of a beat poet, and so he coined me that, and I'll tell you, I've been stuck with it now for a decade, and I've learned to embrace it. So, yeah, thank you for having me on. It's great to be here. I'm married. First of all, I think of myself as a husband and a father of 3 young boys. I live in a multi-racial, multi-class household with a handful of other people here in North Portland. How did I get here? Kind of a rough and tumble kid that faith never came very easily for. And when I got out of college, 3.5 weeks out of college, I climbed on a plane and I moved to a Muslim country, Albania. I lived with a Muslim family for 2 years, and then I went from there to several other hot spots around the Balkans and the Middle East. I was all the way through my 20s. That led to a fair amount of burnout, which got me sent back home to Portland, Oregon, where I've completed a few degrees and had a bunch of adventures here in the Portland area, and just kind of become a professional friend of pastors and church plants and sort of odd ministries that are thinking through faith and the gospel in some new and unique ways. And I'm a professor and a writer. That's how I pay the bills. Just a little bit about me to get you started.
I love that title, professional friend.
That's really the way I try and live. Actually, my entire household tries to live that way, just to be available to others, be it our neighbor across the street or a struggling pastor across town.
That's great. Let's jump into the book, because most of that is in the book, that your backstory there. And actually, this came about for me after interviewing Timothy Curry. He actually sent me a text one day, and he said, I was thinking I got somebody who might be interested in reading their book and maybe having on your podcast. So he told me a little bit about your book and so on. I was familiar with the Tony the Beat Poet name from the Blue Light Jazz book. So, of course, I contacted you, read the book, and I got to tell you, and this might come off like a groupie or I got some sort of man crush on you, but that's all right. I probably read like 20 books a year, and maybe 1 or 2 of those books or picks I refer to this way. I tell my wife afterwards, I say, that book picked me.
Wow.
And your book was truly a book. When I say that about a book, it's a book that I needed. It's a book that resonated with me. It's a book that just wows me. And I love finding those books. And Neighbors and Wise Men was one of those books for me. And I know you probably already have an idea of that because I kept texting you how great it was. So I'm sorry if that was annoying or intrusive by any means, but I did really enjoy it.
That's great to hear.
And your entire journey, really documented in that book, had so many parallels to my own path, which is why I think I just found it so amazing. And I don't know, you ever sat in a church service and felt like the preacher kind of knew your secret? He was preaching just to you?
Yes, I have.
That's how I kind of felt about your book, man. That you understood the kind of the journey and my pain and my confusion and so many things. So the book really helped me, and I'm sure you've had lots of great, incredible feedback on the book, but I'm just going to go on pretending it was written just for me.
There you go.
One of the things I do hate about books like that, though, that when I feel like a book has picked me, is the fact that they have to end. And I'm serious, like when I get down to where I can feel like when your book was getting down to like the last 10 pages, and I could see that I set it down. Like I find reasons not to read it, and I just pace around it because I want to keep reading it, and I know like I'm going to be heartbroken when it ends because it's over, and I would get that experience like once or twice a year. So I have an unhealthy relationship with books. But now that I finished your book and I'm in sackcloth and ashes and I'm mourning, give me a ray of hope for the future and tell me you're working on another book.
Just finished the initial manuscript for the next book.
Yeah.
I will send it off by the end of the month to the publisher, so it'll be out next year, middle of next year. And Neighbors and Wise Men is about relating to the person who is other. And the next book is called Aloof, and it's a book about relating to the God that is other, specifically the God who hides from us. And it's sort of an exploration of God's hiddenness and sort of my adventures with God and the times where I suspect that God was tangibly present, the times where God was obnoxiously present, and the great gaps in between where God seems to disappear entirely.
I'm very excited about that. Keep us updated on that, of course, and hopefully we can have you back on that book as well after I devour it. The first section of your book is titled Living with Muslims, and you already said that you had lived a couple years with in Albania with a Muslim family. You were a missionary over there. I was taught as a young believer that you were not, how would I say it? I guess you weren't allowed to fellowship with the enemy. Spending too much time with any people group outside of Christendom was dangerous. You could get infected.
Right.
They would influence you. But I've learned personally, for me, there's something really powerful about submerging yourself in a different culture that expands your paradigms. It allows you to see people differently. I see the gospel differently. I see myself differently. Being able, I've traveled to like 14 countries now, I think. I lived overseas myself a few years as a missionary, and it's truly altered the way I think. And I'm assuming by reading your book that this has been a similar experience for you.
For sure.
In what ways has that exposure, do you think, helped broaden your paradigms compared to what I felt like I was trapped kind of in a narrow-mindedness
right.
in our American culture? And a lot of foreigners accuse us of that as well.
Right.
How big of an impact did that experience have on you as far as shifting that paradigm?
Yeah, so to start with, I had a similar sort of programming as you did. I was kind of taught growing up to be careful, suspicious of anyone who's different, and then anyone who's notably different, who could be sort of labeled an enemy, and be that, back when I was a kid, that was cults. Cults were an enemy, and then as I grew through life and sort of the things that have happened geopolitically over the last 30 years, Muslims were sort of the key enemy in the world, and they're bad, and I should avoid them. And I think I was also taught that about liberals, progressives, that they should be avoided. And I think there's this human tendency, in fact, I know there's this human tendency that kind of left to ourselves, that we will silo ourselves in homogeneous contexts, and you just have to travel to the churches at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning to see how we do this.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to silo ourselves around people who are just like us, people who think like us and believe like us and spend like us and shop like us and drive like us and vote like us and recreate like we just kind of tend to place ourselves in a context around people who are very, very similar to how we are. And what that does, among many things, is if I'm around just people who are like me in all those ways, it's just obvious that they will tend to have the same blind spots that I have. And we'll sort of have a social contract to reinforce each other's blind spots and not point out the ways that we are blind to the Jesus way around things like money or other cultures or other value systems or whatever. And when one is submerged in a context that is very different, that context does not care about my blind spots. Matter of fact, it crashes up against my blind spots with great force. And when you live in an area like the Balkans or the Middle East, where there is sort of a adventurousness to personalities and an obnoxiousness to personalities, you can't hide in your blind spots anymore as a American white kid. And the Albanian family I lived with, and my best friend was from a Muslim family, and several of my best friends were Muslims over there. They didn't care, and they banged up against me in the most beautiful ways possible, and confronted so many of my ways of thinking that, in fact, were not saturated with what I believe is the Jesus way, the gospel of the kingdom of God. They weren't saturated with those things. They were saturated with other things. They were saturated with my Americanism. They were saturated with my classism. They were saturated with my arrogance and my narrow-mindedness. And I'm just incredibly grateful that I was loved so deeply, and I would say loved as deeply as I've ever been loved by Muslim people for that season of my life, as an example. And then other people groups have played a similar role in different times of my life.
Yeah, I love how you brought that out, that we can't see our blind spots. That's a great way of putting that. On page 27 in the book, you talk about, it just kind of jumped out at me, but your faith family gatherings on Sundays for dinner. This kind of sounds like it is your faith community or maybe your church.
Yeah. I mean, it's so because I spend so much of my life being a friend to pastors, I kind of jump around from church to church on Sunday morning just to sit in and kind of, sit in the second row and let my pastor friends see that I'm cheering for them, because it's a tough world that they live in, an isolated world, and it's often a world without peers, and I just really try and be a peer to those guys. But as a family and as a household, we don't really do Sunday morning. We don't do brick and mortar church, and that's just a decision we've made. It may be just for the season, but instead, what we've been doing for the last 7 years, has been a Sunday evening sacred meal at our house. And our household shows up, so that's my family of 5, plus the other people who live under, that we share a roof with. And then there's a handful of other families and households that come over and join us. So it's 12 to 16 people every Sunday evening around our big dining room table. And my wife and I, we write a short liturgy. Usually takes about 10 minutes just to read some ancient prayers, some scriptures. And then we have a very sort of unique way of taking the Eucharist, taking communion around the table together as a blessing that we would experience Jesus together. And one of the fascinating things about it is everybody who comes knows that it is a Jesus gathering. It's unapologetically. We're going to do Jesus readings and take communion. And yet we've had Buddhists come for 3 years and sit at the table. We've had naturalists and atheists come. We've had struggling Christians come. Even people who are rejecting their lifelong Christendom come and sit at the table for 2 or 3 years at a time, because it was a place where they were free to sort of be sacred and yet also process their questions, their disagreements. And the meal itself usually takes close to 3 hours. And we just sit around and we just talk with one another, and everybody is free to be themselves and be honest. And that means they can be honest about what they're feeling and thinking, but it's also they can be honest about how they want to confront the person across the table, to ask the hard question, the question that we are normally programmed not to ask. But we are free to ask those questions and press on each other and help each other process our feelings, our thoughts, our doubts along the way. And so that's been a very life-giving part of our world the last 6 years.
Beyond the liturgy and the communion, is it kind of how do I want to say it, a designated or a controlled discussion? Like, do you have a topic for the evening? Or when you say 3 hours, you guys just fellowship?
Free flow.
Gotcha.
And we're never the lack for topics. And because it's a truly egalitarian table, everybody knows they have authority to bring up whatever topic they want to talk about. And so we are never struggling for things to discuss. And it's almost always questions of faith, meaning, and life purpose are kind of the areas where we really rest.
Do you guys ever allow it just to go with no depth? Talk about good movies that recently came out.
We do. About once every 2 months, it ends up just being a laugh fest. And we just stay in the jocular, and we just get on a roll. We can't stop ourselves. And that does happen. And there's always moments of levity every week. But every once in a while, we just break down. We just end up laughing through dinner, and it's fun.
That sounds great. Now, you said you almost weekly sit in on brick and mortar churches, you said it as.
Right.
And you even use the word possibly what you're doing now is seasonal. So a lot of people, I think, that get into home church or community like you are, a lot of them are almost anti-institutional church or traditional church, but it doesn't sound that way, the way you're saying it to me. What are your feelings about the institutional church?
So my general feeling is, let me see, how can I flesh this out? So if we take the principles in the New Testament, of what sort of faith gathering, faith community was meant to be. I think the Western manifestation of the brick and mortar church is a very reasonable application of those principles, but it's only an application, right? It's not the application. And a lot of times it's propagated, especially because of our cultural sort of narrow-mindedness, that it's the only way to do church. And that's just a very, very poor reading of the scriptures and a poor understanding of the way of Jesus. But to your point, I would never say it's a bad way. It's a perfectly reasonable way. And it's going to have its positive, it's going to have its negative. It's going to have the things it does that are really beautiful and the things that are, and it's picadillos along the way. Because it's human. It's made up of humans and it's led by humans. Often humans with, there's certain personality issues and their own desires for affirmation and all those sorts of things that we see in humanity. For my family, our primary concern is neighborhood. We see our neighborhood as our parish. We don't see a building full of commuting people as our parish. And I would say, here I'll get a little prophetic, I would say that's a better application of the New Testament, that to see our faith community and our sort of faith responsibility, I don't love that word, but I can't come up with another one off the top of my head. Our faith responsibility is those people that God has placed us in the midst of, the people that we see on Tuesday afternoon as well as Sunday morning, the people we see when we go shopping and when we play at the park with our kids and when we walk our kids to school every morning, and where we see them when we go out for lunch as a family, and just the normal things of life. That's a better application of the New Testament as opposed to this sort of commuterism, consumerism, affinity-based communities that we often see in Christian churches.
Yeah, I think that probably makes you have to be a little more maybe authentic or transparent, because I know there's a tendency for all of us that if we're visiting something outside of our neighborhood once a week for 2 hours, the old jokes about, the couple that fights all the way to church and then they come in smiling with their suit and tie and dress on and saying, good morning, Pastor, God bless you, and being able to put on that facade. But if you live among these people and you share your lives with these people, you're challenged to be, you have to be more authentic, transparent.
Yes. I just wrote an article last month for Christianity Today where I talked about our car as a identity transmorpher. When we climb in our car, we have the ability to sort of become the person we want, the people to see when we arrive at our destination, and how dehumanizing that really is, that process. And yet, when I live in my neighborhood, I don't have the opportunity to play that game because these people do see me. They see me at my worst.
Yeah, I had a similar experience coming from being on paid staff at a mega church, and I kind of had a falling out of my faith. And I wasn't involved in a church, but in a pursuit of God, one of the things I did was I gathered a couple of my buddies, and we started just having Bible study and kind of book study together one morning a week. And over the course of like a year, our relationships between the three of us got so deep, and the transparency between us three got so deep, and the encouragement, and when they hurt, I hurt, and
right.
when something bad or something good happened to them, I truly celebrated. I wasn't jealous, or the light bulb just went off in my head that this is what I read in the New Testament about sharing lives together, and it was something I had missed in the church, in a large church like that. And I'm not saying it's not available there. I had somehow overlooked it or missed it, and that small gathering was a life changer for me for sure.
Yep, there you go. I'm 100% with you. For 8 years now, I've met every Friday morning with a group of men. They've actually been meeting for 20 years, but I've only found them about 8 years ago. And it's a radically multiracial, multi-class, multi-generational gathering. So I'm sitting in the circle with African Americans and Hispanics and Native Americans, men in their 60s and men in their 20s, doing that sort of life with. And it's been transformative for me.
Moving right along, on page 64, let me flip over to that. I'm just going to kind of go in order of how I mark these in the book.
All right.
But on page 64, you discuss an old church custom where the church provided sanctuary. Any person, no matter who they are, what they've done, were provided safe protection within the walls of the church. And the phrase that really leapt out at me and really challenged me was, the church chose providing refuge over maintaining public support. Could you elaborate on that idea a little bit and how that fits into your theology today in your community?
Yeah. So Scriptures place hospitality at a very high bar. I think it's Hebrews 13 verses 1 and 2 that says that we are called to hospitality. And certainly some of the language in the Sermon on the Mount is very pushes us to a level of hospitality that I think very much confronts our culture today, the level of generosity. And so about a year ago, into my neighborhood moved a couple. They were in their 50s. And for 6 months, even though they walked up and down my street, I never saw them once. I was blind to them because of my pathologies and my addictions, because you see they lived in the streets. She was in a big wheelchair, and he would push her around, and he would collect odd jobs around our neighborhood and panhandle all day. I never once saw them. And luckily, my wife saw them, and she befriended them, and they started coming over to our house and hanging out with our kids and our other housemates, and would join us for dinner occasionally, and we became friends. They were living in a tin shed behind this dilapidated house, and the guy charged them $20, some obnoxious amount of money, like $50 a week or something, to sleep in a tin shed with no electricity, no water, sleeping on top of garbage. And so we befriended them, and the lady, she's in a wheelchair, and she's suffering. I'm sure she will die in the next handful of months. And it became impossible for us to see our friends, who were becoming our friends, hurt on the level they were hurting, and struggle to find places to sleep and that sort of thing. So they've been part of our household now for 6 months. They've been sleeping in one of our rooms and being a part of our family. And I can't tell you the number of times that our neighbors, local business owners, because everybody knows the couple because he's always, trying to drum up work, that I've gotten a furrowed brow. And hey, did I hear that you've got this quote unquote couple living in your house? I was like, yeah, no, we live with them. We share a roof with them. They are co-participants in our family. And the look of why would you do that? And that's wrong. It's wrong. That's the general response is that's wrong to do that. And we're like, nothing could be more right. Like, how can you look at humanity and not say that this is something? I'm not talking about religious people. Like, this is what humans do. Is they have we have a roof, and we have warmth, and we have a refrigerator that's full. How could we not do this? And that would be an example of what that the church has continually chosen to do things to provide refuge despite public opinion. And so that maybe that answers your question with a story.
Yeah, it really does. You said in the beginning of chapter 8 that you were raised to believe, and we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but in a two-team world, the haves and the have-nots, or the Christians and everyone else. And something else you said in there was that Jesus did not always point to the Torah when teaching, and that's a powerful point. He didn't always quote Scripture.
Right.
And I find that sometimes my heart or my conscience or my emotions want me to take a different stand than what I was taught that the Bible says about a certain verse or topic. And honestly, that's a topic I'm scared of, and it's a topic that gets me in trouble often with my peers. And it's not that I'm ever saying I think the Bible's wrong, but maybe my understanding or our understanding of that topic is. And as soon as I start wrestling with that idea, though, or as soon as I bring it up, there's always a group or even sometimes maybe it's my own conscience or my own paradigms, but they will oppose what I'm feeling and say you're trying to twist scriptures to have it mean what you want it to mean so it aligns with your worldview. That's a tough issue for me personally. When maybe your heart isn't lining up with traditional scriptural viewpoint on certain topics. How do you deal with that? It sounds like when I read the book, you've done that quite a bit. There's been some, you probably obviously don't have the same theology you did 20 years ago.
Right.
And how do you advise people at your dinner table who are wrestling with those issues?
Yeah. So, Yeah, it's true. I mean, Jesus, it's amazing how often he pointed, when he told his most famous work of fiction, parable, the Good Samaritan, he chooses a cultural and religious outsider to be the hero of the story. In his very, very first sermon, he chooses a widow of Sidon and a leper of Syria as his two examples of people that God showed up for, both of which are cultural and religious outsiders. And we can go on and on. Jesus only once marvels at somebody's faith, and it's a centurion. There's absolutely nothing in the context to lead us to believe he was not a pluralist, an idolater, and a pagan. And yet Jesus marveled at his faith. It's only one time that Jesus said, your faith is great. And it was to a Canaanite woman, a pagan, an underling, a subhuman. And that was the person who said, your faith is great. So it's like, how did I miss all this? How did I live in the church for 30 years and no one ever pointed out the crazy openness that Jesus exhibited towards the most unlikely people and the most unlikely sources as being conduits of God's truth? I don't know of anybody that ever said that to me growing up in a wonderful, wonderful, loving, delightful conservative church. How does this happen? How back to the blind spots, how is it that our filters are so hardwired that we can read through the scriptures and never even notice that 3 or however many foreign, mystical, magical, royal visitors from the East are completely invited into Jesus's nativity story, and no one critiques it. No one goes, "Ooh, that's bad. Can't let those guys in the story." No, the wise men are embraced. Matter of fact, Matthew writes as if the simple fact that they showed up is evidence that God speaks to us and shows up all around us. And so I'm preaching now. I apologize.
And we still display them every year.
Right, all of us. Who points out to their kids to go, "Hey, look at those 3 non-Christians in the nativity set. Isn't that awesome?" Like, we never say that, but that's exactly what it is. They're not just non-Christians; they're Zoroastrians. They're they're kind of crazy people. Yeah. And so what do I do about that? So that's an evidence of where I can't trust my eyes when I look at the Bible. I just can't. I have predetermined structures, cognitive structures, that force me to read the Bible in a certain way based on my particular cultural and religious programming. I can't help it. And it's not that I'm bad, it's not that I'm stupid. It's just that I'm human. We're all wired this way, and that is why, for instance, when the Tower of Babel happened, God said, "I love you. I'm going to help you by helping you live multiculturally, because you need it, because you don't see well when all of you think the same way and talk the same language." It's why in Acts chapter 2, when the Holy Spirit baptizes the church, he says, "Okay, the first thing we're going to do here, everybody, is we're going to do multiculturalism. We're going to do a plethora of languages. We're going to make sure that a bunch of different cultures, as diverse as North African Arabs, quote unquote, in the passage, are invited into the conversation because we need them. You need them, church." And when we get to the end of the church's story in Revelation chapter 7, it says every tongue, tribe, nation, and people are present before the throne and crying out before the Lamb. Why? Because the church was intended to be the most radically multicultural, multi-class, multiracial expression. Why? Because we all are the image of God. And so I can't trust myself when I go to the scriptures. And it's not that I want to lower my bibliology or my view of the Bible, but I want to elevate my pneumatology. I want to elevate my confidence in the Spirit of God to lead us into truth, lead us into truth. Very rarely are there New Testament statements about spiritual identity or spiritual wholeness that are put in the single person. They're almost always, we should go through and change our entire Bible to y'alls. Y'all are the children of God. Y'all are a new creature. Y'all are, and unfortunately in English we just put you. And as an addicted individualist, Western individualist, I read that and I think the Bible's talking to me. It's not talking to me. It's talking to us. And I'm in desperate need of my brothers and sisters in Christ, and people, quite frankly, who wouldn't even identify with Christianity, to help me see what I do not see.
That is something that God has just woke me up to in the last few years, and all these years in the church. The fact that, one example I give quite often when having this discussion is, the fruit of the Spirit. And in the way I was raised, and the way we Sunday school our children and everything else, the fruit of the Spirit. If you have the Spirit of God, you, individual,
right,
you will have love, you will have joy, you will have peace. But if you go back and read the epistles, they were written to churches. They were written to communities. And it was just a couple years ago that light bulb went off, and God showed me that a community will have patience. A community will be long-suffering. A community will have peace. A community will have love. That was written to a church, to a community. And we're so egocentric and self-centered that, this is all about just me, and changing my life and me becoming like that I missed it. Yeah, so I 100% get what you're saying there. And
we have to remember that a couple other pieces on that. Yes, Paul was writing his epistles, but ultimately the Holy Spirit was writing it to the universal church. And it's amazing that the churches that we have the letters to, those were incredibly cosmopolitan churches. Those were churches that were incredibly multicultural cities. Obnoxiously so. Ephesus was a port city. Corinth was the most diverse city in the Roman world at the time. Rome was an incredibly diverse. These were incredibly culturally diverse cities, and it just goes to bear that the churches were equally diverse. And Paul's going, y'all are the voice of God.
Y'all would fly good here in Cincinnati, Ohio, right on the Kentucky border. We definitely need that version of the Bible. Chapter 9, your intro. You asked a kind of question in the beginning, and it said, have you ever lost something intimately precious? Have you ever lost your hopes or a significant dream? Have you ever, because of your own pathology, squandered away your reputation or sacrificed your honor? Have you ever experienced rejection from your closest friends or the loss of your life's love? Have you ever experienced all of these things in just under a week? I did, and I just want to say, Tony, again, this book resonates with me because I did too. I too was a zealot that was out to change the world, obsessed with the thought that I had to have a great purpose and leave a mark on the world. And just like what I read you went through, I really ended up spiritually dead and burnt out. Now, a huge difference, I think, between you and I and that brief period of time was, whereas I'm reading about you were trying to jar yourself awake, I threw in the towel. And it seems like both cases that God met us in unlikely places, met us not on our terms, met us not at our beckoning and calling. So to a listener today who would be listening and they feel spiritually dead, they feel disconnected, I have trouble advising people on that because it's not like I got back on track or on the new track, the better track, through discipline, through ritual. I didn't work it back up. God just kind of showed up and met me. So how do you encourage somebody that feels disconnected right now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, again, in the story of the Jesus way, one thing is very, very clear. I am not the most important character in my spiritual story. I am not the protagonist of my spiritual story. God, specifically Christ, in the presence of the Holy Spirit, is the most important character in my spiritual story. Much more vested in my spiritual story, much more engaged in my spiritual story, and ultimately is the protagonist. And there's no one of the great things about having an eternal God who's eternally creative is there's no one way to sort of get our crap together. So sometimes it is discipline. But for somebody like me who's particularly obnoxious and who lives my life sort of at 80 miles an hour, I use the illustration in the book that a lot of people's faith sounds like a Sunday drive when they're, going down the road, two people on a Sunday drive with the wind in their hair and singing songs and just enjoying the wonder of their life. And my spiritual life feels like a car going 80 on a cliff-top gravel road where I accelerate out of every corner just seeing if the wheels will hold the curve. And and more than once I've toppled my life off the edge of a cliff because that's the way that God made me, and God loves me that way, in that. And with my particular version of 80-mile-an-hour cliff-top gravel road faith, it requires that God bankrupt me several times in my life because that's how he gets my attention. And the bankruptcy is almost always dramatic. And yet, Jesus, in the first line of his most famous sermon, said, blessed are those who are spiritually bankrupt. And I'm thankful. I'm thankful to the Lord. Every time, and this next book, Aloof, is the title of the next book, I get even more deeply into that discussion of what did it look like for me in that season to get to the point of spiritual bankruptcy, and why did I get there? And I'm a lot more graphic with the storytelling in the next book, and then what did God do to sort of scrape all of my faith clean, both my good beliefs and my bad beliefs, because they had grown up together like wheat and tares. They couldn't be separated. So God came in and scraped the entire field free and started over because I needed it, and that was God's grace.
That helps me so much. Wow. Because I feel like I went through the same experience, and I loved how you worded that, the scraped and the bankrupt spiritually. And I just, I had so much pride and so much zeal. Man, I really thought I had it together and was going somewhere, and God really had to knock me off of that horse. And I remember that one of the young adults, when we came back from the mission field, I had them over for dinner, somebody that I had youth pastored when they were in their teenage years. Now they were a married couple. And I remember telling them over dinner that everything I thought I had known and believed was gone. And I was totally relearning my relationship with God and my understanding of the Bible. I mean, of course, my belief in God or Christ didn't change, but my entire theology had been destroyed, and I was rebuilding from a brand new, fresh start. And I could tell that it upset them, that they felt like I had lost my way when I admitted that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
And the thing is, you had lost your way.
Yeah.
But Jesus is the way. Jesus holds the way. Like me holding on to it isn't the purpose of the story. Jesus is writing and unfolding the way before us, and at times we lose it. And often in our religious triumphalism, we've lost it, and we just don't know it, and we get applause from the religious people, even though we've lost our way, because we think it's about us, or we think it's about my particular subset of people, my particular theological subset, my neo-whatever that I believe. That is what's important. And in that we've lost our way, and yet we haven't, because Jesus is the way.
Hey, I'm thinking about, when you're talking about that, I'm thinking about other people I know have kind of had this struggle. And one thing I think that may be a common mistake and is that sometimes when we lose our way, I think you and I, the way we're talking, we saw it as a fresh start. But I notice a lot of people who look back to what they used to have, and they keep trying to resurrect that.
Yeah.
And I think the whole idea and what God allowed them to go through was to get rid of it and start anew.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling with that, let God speak to you, and don't try to relive the past and look back, but see where God's trying to lead you through this experience.
Yeah, I feel like you're just like teeing up this entire next book. But so one of the themes of the book is the idea of looking back. Let's go ahead and celebrate each season for what it was, and realize that God treats us just like education theory treats us. Like when I was a little boy, nobody wanted me to write abstract essays because I didn't have the capacity to do it. That didn't mean my education when I was a child was bad or good or better or anything. It just is who I was. I was a child. And then when I got to be, a young adult, I was welcomed into abstract essays and other things in my education, and people treated me differently. And I think God treats us differently at different seasons of our life. God invented education theory, right? Education people just discovered what God designed for humanity. And so there are those times when God feels very near, and God's gracious in those times. In the book, I refer to them as the dojo years, when it just seems like God is near. The master is just around the corner at all times, shouting instructions at us. And there's a great comfort in that. But that was that time. And no superhero in the comic book stays in the dojo forever. They all know the dojo is just for a season because there's something else that God's inviting them into, or the master's inviting them into. And I would want to frame it that way, to celebrate those seasons instead of trying to sort of manufacture them again.
Yeah, and to the opposite works as well when you're talking about as a child, no one would have that expectation from you. It's okay to crap your pants when you're 2.
Exactly.
But if you're still doing it at 12, there's an issue. So some Christians need to grow up.
Yeah. We need to have the freedom to step into each other's lives and say that, and not pad everything with dismissive spiritual language. Just go. You need to grow up. You just need to grow up. You need somebody to step in your life to tell you that.
That's what my wife's for in my life.
Yeah, me too.
Brutally honest. Now we've kind of already crossed more than the time you allotted for me, and I greatly appreciate that. And I told you before we got started, this is going to have to probably be a 2-part, 3-part interview because I've got so much, and I'm only like on page 87 of the book where I want to talk to you about. But let's finish on the last note I got here. On page 87, it says that you talked about being in seminary when you got home from the mission field, and you said, I have questions. And I need to know that having questions is okay. And I really loved reading that. And I think that the church has a long-standing reputation of kind of being narrow-minded, not allowing people to have questions, not allowing people to doubt, kind of giving us the only option, you need to conform or be ostracized.
Right.
And we talked about before we got on this call, or before we started recording on the call, we were talking about how my wife and I started a home fellowship, and we somewhat adopted, I guess it would have been kind of a piece of Peter Rollins' idea of suspended space, and what we wanted to create with our home fellowship. We wanted to create an environment where there was no Jew, no Greek, no Christian, no atheist, no black, no white, no gay, no straight, no Republican, Democrat, etc. And just a group of people that God loved and who would openly wrestle with scriptures. And it sounds like somewhere along the lines that your table and your household is much like that, and you openly wrestle with these ideas. We wanted to encourage people to actually have doubt, to have questions, to openly state, well, I don't agree with you, and I don't see it that way.
Right.
How important do you think that is to a faith community in this day and age?
Yeah, there's such a strong tendency to want to control dialogue and control the vocabulary. And I think that comes from several places. I think it comes because we have been given in our post-Enlightenment, post-Cartesian culture a version of faith that is primarily answer-driven, cognitively driven, philosophically driven. So that's one piece. But I also think that all of us, every single one of us, use our faith as a fulcrum of validation, and we can't help ourselves. It's part of being human, and I utilize faith and the mechanisms of faith to prove that I'm good, that I'm one of the good guys. And so when somebody comes with a question, I want to jump in and show them that I have the answer, because the good guys have the answers and the bad guys don't. And I need to be one of the good guys. I have a friend. We have a friend named Molly, who is a delightful, amazing woman. She's about my age. She's a single mother of a teenage girl. Her boyfriend is a biker. She's fascinating. She has tats all over her body and a very romantic relationship with the color black. She recently had an encounter with Jesus. All of her life, she's been a pluralist. Never, ever wanted to be connected to any belief system. And she was sitting in her car, and God spoke to her. She says it was audibly that God spoke to her. It was very, very specific. And God met her in a point of extreme pain, and she was convinced it was Jesus. And again, that was just her experience, somebody who's a lifelong pluralist. And then out of that, she made a deal with God, which is very funny. Like, she had this encounter with God, and she was very appreciative that God would talk to her in her pain and make her feel better. But she was like, God, here's the deal. I need you to get me a job. That's the deal. I will follow you for a lifetime, but I need you to get me a job. I can't feed my kid right now, and we're getting to the end of the month. And the next morning, she bumped into a woman who, out of the blue, asked her if she could cook and said, I have a job opening at my cafe. Would you come work for me? And Molly was able to feed her kid, and she is now an unapologetic follower of Jesus. She's a little pissed off at Christianity, but she's an unapologetic follower of Jesus. Follow the triune God, reads her Bible every day. I mean, anything that we would say, that's a Christian, she is one, right? As soon as this happened, she went to a Christian counselor because she had questions. And the Christian counselor, every time she would ask her a question, would tell her, you're not allowed to have those kinds of questions. Those are bad questions. She was wrestling with with her metaphor of how God's in all the world, not just the Christian world. She was asking questions about how God has broken God's self into 1,000 little pieces all over the world so that different people can find him. And he said, you're not allowed to have those kinds of questions. And when she sat down with me to talk to me about it, she was very distraught about it. And I said, Molly, just keep asking your questions. Those are the way that you are asking questions are evidence of your faith, because you're asking questions as if God is really there. And the problem with religious people is we don't ask questions anymore as if God is really there. We just ask questions about ideas. I said, Molly, I'm not going to answer your questions with my particular opinion, because I like the question so much. I just want you to sit in the question because I think God is in the question. So sit with God. Well, I love your questions. They're evidence of faith. And why would I do anything to try and sort of derail your question along the way? I love it. Stay in it. And so I think our questions and our doubts, which is just another word for questions, are places where God shows up. And not only shows up, but like Thomas, God shows up and he says, bring here your finger and stick it in my side. Bring here your finger and stick it in the holes in my hands that you might not be unbelieving but believing. God invites us to be that level of invasive with our questions and our doubts and has total space for it.
That's beautiful. I love that. Well, again, Tony, that's all the time. I took too much time from you today.
Oh, it's been great.
You've been very generous with it. I'm very excited. I'm excited to talk to you again. I'm excited about the new book coming out, and we definitely will, as soon as I stop recording here, we'll set up another time to have you back on for part 2 so we can finish this book. I know it's going to get a great response.
Yeah, you've only barely made it through the first section, and there are 4 sections of the book. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm telling you. I warned you when we got on here that And here's the sad part. I cut out a lot of the questions I wanted to ask on the first quarter of the book, so we'll definitely have to do it again, man. I very love the book again. I'm very excited about it, and this is even a greater treat for me having you expand on some of these ideas. It's been really helpful to me. But we will schedule that and have you back on again real soon. Appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
That's it for part 1 of our interview with Tony today. I hope you enjoyed that and look forward to having you back to listen to part 2. All of Tony's links and contact information will be in the show notes at grapplerschurch.tv/Tony Kriz. That's Kriz. grapplerschurch.tv/Tony Kriz. There you will also find a link to purchase the book via Amazon, either paperback, Kindle, whatever you prefer. That's if you didn't take advantage of the free offer at the start of the show from Audible. Until next time, Grapplers Church, grab a hold of God and don't let go.